Beaumont Tiles is by far the largest tiles business in the industry in Australia, with nearly 100 outlets. About half are company shops and the other half are franchisees. They have extensive trade operations here in South Australia, as well as in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, employing about 450 people. Bob Beaumont joined his father's business at the ripe old age of 18, starting off in the warehouse and deliveries while he studied marketing. Eventually, Bob became general manager in 1978. Bob is married to Sue, who's with us tonight, and together they have 2 kids and 1 grandchild upon whom Bob dotes. He's still actively involved in the business and can't think of anything more boring than retirement. Would you please welcome Bob Beaumont? Bob, it's great to have you here tonight. You don't know what you're in for, but I think we'll have a good time. What were some of the immediate challenges when you took over as general manager in '78?
Cash. As with any business, cash is always a real problem. And when I took over in '78, and then for the next quite a few years, we're always running out of cash. And those of you who are in small businesses will probably know that problem really, really well. So that was our biggest issue right up until the mid-90s, when I just made up my mind that, OK, we're not going to do this anymore. The primary thing is cash flow, and that's what we're going to target. And so we targeted that, and that solved it. But that was the really big problem.
Does that, having solved it back in the 90s, does it continue to be a problem now, or are there other challenges?
It's not so much of a problem. We have wonderful bankers, and we have a sensational financial controller who predicts when problems are going to occur, and we can work around it.
So, Bob, looking back over the last 35 years of business, what would you say are the biggest business achievements for you?
I guess it would have to be growing the business to 100, or nearly 100. Back in about 1992, I set a goal, and I'm really big on goals. I set a goal to click over $100 million turnover in 1 year. And that caused a huge argument between me and my general manager, which culminated in him going, because he just didn't think that was a responsible objective. Well, in 2000 we clicked over 100 million. I was very satisfied with that.
So why has Beaumont Tiles lasted the course when others have come and gone?
Look, I think there's a lot of answers for that. I think one of the things we really believe in is we care. Not only do we care about profit, you've got to do that, and cash flow, you've got to do that. We care about people. And the number of people that we have who have stuck around for 10, 15, 20, 30, 35 years is absolutely amazing. You know, you go through... We just had a new lady start on Monday who is our new marketing manager. She replaced our previous marketing manager who retired after 30 years. And she was saying to me how astounded she was at the number of people who have clicked over 15, 20, 30 years. And I think... the people, really, that makes the difference, the people, and they're loyal to the company and the company is loyal to them. And I think loyalty is a lot what it's about. You establish your standards, you believe in your standards, and people will believe in you.
We're going to hear a little bit more about the culture of the business and the culture that you have instigated from the top down as well as we work through the evening. But it is interesting to hear of people sticking around. Obviously, there's something in the culture that makes them want to come to work each day, which is fabulous. Well, now time to introduce our next speaker. Seeley International is now Australia's leading manufacturer of heating and cooling systems. From humble beginnings in an Adelaide garage in 1972, Seeley International now has manufacturing plants in 2 states, sales offices in every mainland state, as well as in USA and across Western Europe, exporting to more than 120 countries. From producing 1,000 coolers in their first year, Seeley now has the capacity to produce over 1,000 units in a single day. Along the way, there have been many world firsts for this proudly South Australian business. Frank is married to Kathy, who is also here tonight, and together they have 4 kids, yes, of which I am one, and they have 8 grandchildren. Frank is still actively involved in the business and is on record as saying he never wants to retire. Would you please welcome Frank Seeley AM.
I won't kiss you, mate.
Thank you, Kari, for that awesome introduction. I'll remind you of various facets of that over the next 25 years.
And beyond, I hope. I hope you'll stick around that long. Frank, what were some of the challenges you faced in 1972 when you first set up the business?
Well, Kari, the business was born really out of the fact that somebody else pulled the rug from under me. And I came home, I'd been selling evaporative coolers for 5 years, and suddenly the rug was pulled. Selling on commission, and the reason that was given to me was, well, we're paying you too much commission. Well, of course, that means that they were doing very well. But anyway, that was the basis. So I came home and said to my wife, Kathy, we just paid off our house, incidentally, and I said, I think we'll make our own coolers. And she said, okay. And I said, that means we're going to have to mortgage the house again. She said, okay. I said, it actually means we're going to have to mortgage the house more heavily than it's ever been mortgaged before. She said, okay. I thought, I'm not getting through to you, girls. So I said, now, if everything goes well, it'll be fine. If not, we could lose the lot. She didn't hesitate. She looked me in the eye and she said, I don't care if I have to live in a tin shed as long as I can live with you. And yes, for Kathy. Now, that sounds perhaps sentimental, but it's not. The importance of our business or what Kathy did when she took that position has been so important to our business. Because I've never had to make a decision on the basis of, well, if this goes wrong, how will I handle it at home? And that has been a great release. There's been lots of other releases too. So, a long answer to your question. It may not even be an answer to your question, I'm not sure.
Bob identified that cash was an issue when he first took over as General Manager in 1978. For you, an income was important, and that's really how the business got started. Is that a similar challenge for you today, or are you facing new challenges 40 years on?
Well, cash is always a problem, and if you're growing your business, it's going to continue to be a problem. And we are growing the business. We're growing market share at a quite phenomenal rate, and we have plans to make the company by 2020 a $1 billion company, and we're on track for doing that at the moment. But it's going to be a fairly steep curve, and of course cash will be a problem along the way. But the important thing is to have bankers who understand business. We've had bankers before who don't understand business, the sort of people that will give you an umbrella when the sun's shining and take it away when it starts to rain. They really don't have too much idea about it, but we've got great bankers. I know Westpac's here tonight, Bob, and you've given them a plug. Let me give a plug to ANZ. They have been wonderful people to us. But they've also been God's provision to us, because we went through some very difficult times along the way. Kari asked about challenges. I suppose the biggest challenge that ever hit us was in 1989 when we had $5 million worth of stock stolen from us. Now, I call it the multicultural con, whereby an Israeli married to an Australian but cohabiting with an American and living in Greece stole $5 million worth of stock from us. And that was when interest rates were through the roof. I think with the penalties that our then bankers put on us, we were paying 25%. And they had the temerity to say to me, "We don't think you're going to get out of this." Not much wonder, but we did. And frankly, it was the hand of God over our business that brought us through that. Yes, we had to do things. It wasn't a matter of sitting back and waiting for something to come out of the sky from somewhere. It wasn't that at all. But the fact is, we had time and time again the bankers saying, "You've got to bring in equity." Now, I can't do that. As a practicing Christian, I can't bring in equity because the Bible says, "Don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers." So I couldn't do it. And it was not until I said, "Take the business if you have to, but I'm not going to bring in equity," that they started to get the message, and God blessed us. There's no question about that.
So just quickly, what would you say is the reason that Seeley International is still here when there have been other air conditioning players that have come and gone in those 40 years?
Well, frankly, for the reason I've just said. At that time, when we went through that crisis, and I don't mind telling you, every time I met with the jerk that we had to meet from our bankers at that point in time, at the end of it all, I probably sat in my car for 10 minutes or so, and I cried. But at that time, it was a great experience because at that time, Kathy and I came to the clear understanding that the business didn't belong to us. We're only stewards for it. We're only here for a short period of time to look after it. And ultimately, we'll be called to give an account of how we've looked after that, as we will be in relation to how we've looked after our family, as we will in relation to everything we do in our lives. We're here as stewards. This is a learning time, this is a growing time, and there are always growing pains.
Bob, the evening is called Success Without Compromise. What's your definition of success?
I think everybody's definition of success is different. What is success for one person is not success for another. What Frank and I have achieved is recognised as success in business. But what is success? Success for another person might be raising a family. Another person, it might be doing something completely different. It might be in sports or anything. So what is success? I think firstly you have to define what is success to you. And then after that, how do you achieve it? What will success look like when you achieve it? I think too many people go charging down a track thinking they know what success is without actually defining what success is to them. What will their business, what will their life, what will they look like when they achieve success? Then go backwards from there and start a plan to achieve that. You don't want to start halfway down the track and then realise that you really don't know where you're going. And so I think it's very important to look inside yourself. If you're a believer, to pray about it and to figure out just where you're going to end up. Start with the end in mind, as was put in a good book recently. Not so recently.
So, Frank, how do you measure success?
Well, I think success is not success unless it covers every facet of our lives. I have an older brother who... and he's quite a lot older than me and still alive, amazingly, but he's there anyway. He made business his objective. He was a Christian, but business became the all-important thing of his life, and there were casualties along the way. Casualties of children that didn't really grow up, except for one, to be of anything worthwhile. Casualties of a marriage along the way. And I had a tremendous advantage. I saw him go that way, and I thought, that's not the way I want to go. I want to have my family, and if I haven't got my family, if I haven't got my wife with me, and if I haven't got my family, then it doesn't matter how much money I have in the bank. It doesn't matter how much people give me approbation as I go places. I've failed. I'm a failure, because the greatest investment any of us can ever make is into our families, into our children. They're the future of what we do, much more than what might be there by way of a business or a bank account or any of such things. That's right.
Bob, how hard-nosed or uncompromising do you need to be to succeed in business?
That's a really, really interesting question. How hard-nosed do you have to be? Look, you have to be fairly firm. You have to be very firm sometimes, but that's okay. You can be firm. I don't think that being a Christian in business means that I have to roll over and let people have their way necessarily. I think you can come to compromises. You can see what's important to another person, and if that's not that important to you, you can negotiate in that way. But how firm do you have to be? Yeah, pretty firm. You have to be firm in your beliefs too, because you don't want to compromise them.
You mentioned that you set a goal of 100 million turnover. How uncompromising did you have to be? Obviously there were words between you and your general manager. How difficult was it then to stay the course over the next few years before you got there?
It was pretty difficult. You have to be very focused. I think, somebody said to me once, how do you achieve success? And I said, well, I think it's single-minded determination combined with a bit of flair and intelligence. And I think single-minded determination is very, very good. But you can't let that compromise what you believe in either. And so we probably could have got to that a bit faster. But then I would have had to live with it.
Frank, is there any tension for you between being a success in business and living out your Christian faith in the day-to-day?
No, there really isn't. I mean, it's a challenge at all times to see whether you're being fair in what you're saying, and we have a reputation for being tough. Seeley International is recognised as a company. They're tough, but they also add, but they're fair. And that's the important thing. I don't mind the toughness tag as long as the fair one is there with it. And it's as simple as this. If Seeley International is a company that keeps its word. It honours its undertakings, whatever they may be. Even if they're made by people in a rogue way, we'll honour them if we have to. We will talk to the people and see how they want to handle such things, but we will honour them if they insist in that situation. So if we're going to honour our undertakings, then we have to insist that everybody else with whom we deal honour theirs. Otherwise, we can't honour ours. When you look at it that way, it's a very simple question.
Bob, how does your choice to follow Jesus inform or guide your decision-making in business?
That's a good one. How does it inform or guide? Quite a lot, tremendously actually, because you have to have your standards, and the standards are set by your beliefs. And so I believe in Jesus. I believe what he said is true. I believe that the way he laid out for us to live our lives is the right way. So you have to live your life according to your beliefs. I think it's very tempting, though, for people to point fingers and say, "Oh, that bloke's that guy's a hypocrite because he doesn't do this or he doesn't do that." People will always judge you, but as long as you are prepared to live your life uncompromisingly to the beliefs that you believe are what Jesus set down, then I don't think there is a problem, and I find that just guides what I do in business all the way. I think it's tremendously important.
Frank, there's probably people here tonight who haven't read the Bible or any of it, let alone think that it has anything to say about life in the office. Do you read your Bible regularly?
Yes, I do. I'd like to say I read it every day, but just this very week I missed out one day. But it's normal. It's what I normally do every day, and some other materials too. Because quite frankly, the Word of God says that man, and Jesus quoted this, man to the devil, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Now, if we are Christians, we will shrivel and we will become ineffective and possibly worse if we don't feed on the Word of God. And when I read my Bible in the morning, I need to get something that's going to help me through the day. I mean, I've had some incredible experiences over the years. Back in this time that I talked about, when we had the bank on our hammer, there was a suggestion that we should go and compromise with the guy in Greece, and he wanted to do it. We had made an arrangement with him when he was in trouble and couldn't pay. He broke that arrangement, and that was it, as far as I was concerned. And I felt convicted that it should be it. But I had lawyers and all sorts of people saying you should change it. And eventually, when I was in a place called La Spezia in Italy, talking to the shipping people to tell them why we couldn't pay and when we would pay, I got up that morning and I read a verse in Isaiah which I never knew was there before. And I'd spoken to all these people, and Kathy was in Athens organising a meeting with this jerk. And there's been a few jerks around.
It's a different jerk to the one at the bank.
And so I said, yes, we'll come back and we'll have this meeting with him and we'll strike a compromise. Got out of bed in La Spezia about 6 o'clock in the morning, and where I was up to in the Bible in Isaiah said these words: your advisors will lead you astray. And I said, no, Lord, no. But I read it again and again and again. And I rang Kathy a little later on and I said, cancel that arrangement. Here's what I've read this morning. Now, I'd read Isaiah many times before, but that had never, ever, ever affected me. I didn't know it was there until suddenly it came out almost in neon lights. And, it was the right thing. We stopped that. And it wasn't all that long after that A, he died, and B, we got our goods back. So there is, I tell people there is a moral. There is a moral there. Never mess with me. But seriously, that was a turning point for us. And it was as if God said, well, you're going to obey my word, or are you going to go and do your own thing because other people have told you that that's what you should do? Now, the people who told me, they were good people. They were excellent people, if lawyers can be excellent people. And I apologise to anybody who I've just offended, but anyway. But the fact is, ultimately, the Word of God is what's got to guide you and drive you in what you do. And you can't afford to step outside the boundaries that it sets for us.
Tonight's event was called Success Without Compromise. Now, negotiating and compromise are like breathing for the two of you, I'm sure. Bob, do you enjoy negotiating and compromising, striking deals?
Yes, I do enjoy negotiation. I particularly like coming out of a negotiation with what I need to come out of a negotiation with. But I do think there's a real trap with negotiation and dealing with people, and it comes down to attitude. If you have the right attitude with negotiation, you're going there for a result. But unfortunately, if you've got a position of power, it's a real temptation to use that position of power just because, hey, it feels good to win, and to use that power to the detriment of somebody else just for the kick of it, that's a really bad thing to do, I think. So it depends on your motives as to what motivates you. Why are you there to negotiate, and why do you need to do this or this or this? Not, I get my jollies from winning. That's not what it's about. You're there for a purpose. You've got to be logical, firm, and decide what you need to do. You're not there to kick somebody.
Bob, again, have you ever been challenged to compromise your values or Christian beliefs in that process of negotiating?
Absolutely. I think if anybody isn't tempted to compromise their beliefs, they're not breathing. They should go and look in a mirror. But the whole thing is not to give in to that where your motivation is wrong. You know, you can be firm, as Frank was saying, you can be hard, but you don't want to be hard just for the sake of being hard, not for the sake of pride. You want to be doing something and to achieve something for a purpose, because you need that particular result, and not to be greedy, but to achieve what you set out to achieve.
Frank, you mentioned before that there's a bit of a reputation, Seeley International, tough but fair. In the 40 years or so of the business developing and growing, how do you get to that point where people know that you're tough but fair? Along the way, have you had to be extra tough and not so fair?
No, I've never had to be. But that doesn't mean that I never have been. In other words, I have to say here that there are times when I've done exactly what Bob said you shouldn't do. I have gone after people in a situation because I had them down, and I'm not proud of that. That's got nothing to do with Christianity. That's got nothing to do with the way one should live. But I've got to tell you, I paid for it in a condemnation, if you like, that came upon doing it. And at times I was able to go back and say, look, I've decided we're going to do something more. But by and large, and I'm talking probably some years ago, and God's very gracious with us. We all often offend, the Bible says, and gee, that's me. But by and large, no. These days, in fact, God has given me the grace to learn where to pull back. Yes, you have to get what you have to get, but where you can compromise, then you should do so, because that's actually the way Christianity is supposed to work.
One of the values that each of you hold dearly is integrity. Has your integrity ever got you into hot water, Bob?
I've been thinking about that, and I can't think of a place where it's got me into hot water at all. I think certainly disadvantages in the short term, absolutely, where you refuse to do something because it's just not the right thing to do. But I can't think of a time where I look back and think, gee, if I'd done it that way, it would have been a lot better in the long run. No, I can't say that I've found that in the long run it hasn't worked out for the best. I find that if I do the right thing, and if I have integrity, in the long term, it works because people know they can trust you. I'm not saying that I've done that all the time, in every situation in business. I haven't. Everybody makes mistakes. As Frank was saying, you look back on things and say, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. But when you do the right thing, I think eventually it turns out that you do the right thing, and it comes about for good.
Frank, has your integrity ever got you out of hot water?
Times without number, I'd have to say. Particularly again with bankers. standing up to them and standing firm, because but you know, I have a wonderful heritage. I was the youngest of 8 kids. I didn't get much heritage from the other 7, I got to just tell you. But my father died when I was 9, but he was a godly man, and what he taught me by example was how to take responsibility for whatever happens in your life. Now, we used to have family devotions at breakfast time, and as I was the youngest, I was the last one brought to the table, and always my father had his Bible open and his glasses on, and he would look around and then he would take the family devotion. One morning when I came in, the Bible was closed, and I thought, I was about 7, I suppose, at the time, and I thought, what's going on there? And then my father took his glasses off and folded them. And then he looked around at the other 9 people around the table and said, I want to apologise to this family for being such a bad father. And I thought, you're the best father in the world. He said, because if I'd have been the father I should have been, the fight that occurred last night, and he was talking about an argument between the older members of this family, would never have happened. Now, I can tell you there wasn't a dry eye around that table, and it would have melted the others who were involved. The only reason I wasn't involved, I'm sure, was because I was in bed and asleep when it happened. But, you know, that taught me a wonderful lesson. So integrity involves that you say that you're wrong when you are wrong, and say that you're sorry. And, of course, one of the problems with power, being at the head of a company, is that you really don't have to. If you don't want to, people don't expect you to. But I've got to tell you, when you go and say to them, I'm wrong, I was wrong and I'm sorry, and you get together all the people that were there when you transgressed, whether it was through ignorance or through anger or whatever it might have been, you know, that affects people, and that affects the culture of the company. And I also insist that they forgive me. I'm sorry I've done that thing and I'm asking you for your forgiveness. Well, people will go everywhere but give it to you if they can possibly get away with it. But I keep at them until they finally say yes. And you know, that actually means that people say, well, here's a place where there's openness and honesty right from the top, and if it's at the top, it'll percolate down. If what's at the top is something different, then that will affect the whole culture of the company. So integrity, no, I'd have to say integrity has been a wonderful friend and ally in the more recent years of my business, the last 20 years or so, when integrity became more important to me. Sorry for the long answer.
What advice would you give to people in the room who perhaps in a work setting are seeing the bad guys win?
Is that to me or to Bob?
Who would like to say?
It's your turn.
Look, the bad guys do sometimes win, especially in the short term. That's okay. That's okay. As long as the good guys win more often than the bad guys. This is a numbers game. It's not winning 100% of the time. But I think that you do see bad guys win, and in some industries it's really, really difficult. For example, if one of your beliefs is that you don't compromise on bribery, and you deal in some countries overseas where bribery is part of the culture and you can't get around it. So what do? Do you stay in that business? Do you stay in that country? Or do you get out and do something else? You need to answer that question. And so there's a lot of things that we set standards on, and we need to figure out whether we want to stick around in that industry or not. So the bad guys do win sometimes, but you know, it's amazing how often the bad guys fall by the wayside eventually. You know, I've been around the block a few times, and Frank's been around it a few more times, and so and you know, I think of the people who were in the building industry in particular, who I deal with and have dealt with over the years. You know, the bad guys, they tend to strip themselves up after a while, and they tend to fall out. If you found that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And, I mean, we had a terrific test at one point in time back in the 80s. Rooftop coolers were relatively new to us. We made them out of plastic and no one else had done that. And a Middle Eastern country that shall remain nameless, I might share it with Alex later, but nobody else, they ordered 1,000 of our biggest coolers. That was $1 million, and that was back, as Dudley Moore would say, when $1 million was a lot of money. So they said, yes, go ahead. My export manager was there. He saw the order signed, was ready to come. Can I have it? No, it'll be with you in another week or so, a week or so. So he came home and he said, order the motors, start moulding the products. They're giving us the order. So a week went past and nothing came. As 2 weeks went past, nothing came, and he's sort of ringing them daily, the export manager at that point in time. Then we got a telex, and that'll tell you how long ago it was. Telex, which said, we know about your order number so-and-so for 1,000 model so-and-so Breeze Air evaporative coolers. The order has been placed, but we know that you haven't got it, and you're not going to get it unless and until you put 10% of that amount into a bank account, a Swiss bank account that will give you when you acknowledge that you're going to do it. So we took advice from shearers who were doing a lot of export in that area, and their advice was, oh, you've got to do it. And I said, I'm not going to do it. I will not get onto that merry-go-round. And all the time they're making these coolers, and you know, $1 million would have been a huge problem to us then and there. But a few days later, we sent them, and the telex came from a bureau in Paris, and we got onto Interpol, and they said, we really can't locate that because they can come and go, and that's the way they do these things. So we sent them an email, not an email, a telex back which said, what you're asking us to do is against the law in your country, and if we were to go there afterwards and it was known, we would be jailed. But quite apart from that, we're not going to become involved in bribery, and we've reported you to Interpol, and they are making investigations. 2 days later, we had the order. We didn't get any more from them, but we had that one.
Bob, what experiences do you feel have profoundly grown your character?
There's been a lot of difficulties which we've faced over the years, and you know, the money situation right through has taught me that you really have to manage carefully. People who have done the wrong thing, you know, people who come on board and they are supposed to be terrific people, and they eventually end up not to be terrific people, and then you have to move them on. And I think I started off being pretty soft. I ended up being a lot harder because you have to be firm with people if they're not doing the right thing. You're loyal to people if you can be, and if they respond in loyalty, then it becomes a two-way street. But if they do the wrong thing, you react quickly, firmly, and you know, as you said, Frank, firm but fair. I find that staff, in particular, really appreciate firm but fair. They want to be fair. They want you to be fair, but they want to know where they stand. And I think it's too easy, and this is what I've learned over a lot of incidents where it's too easy to fluff around the edges, and people don't know where they stand, and they don't respect you for that. And it's not a good thing. It's actually a bad thing. So they know where they stand. You set your standards, and if they don't comply with that, then sorry, let's shake hands and part company.
Sometimes that process is easier said than done.
Yes, it is. It is easier said than done, but you know what? I have never dismissed somebody and then thought later, gee, I did that too early.
Now, these days we seem to be influenced by passing fads and the bright lights of celebrity, where people now are simply famous for being famous or famous for behaving badly. But who are three people, Frank, we'll throw this question to you first and then Bob, who are three people who have influenced your life?
Well, the first would be my father. And I've told you about that, and I'm sure you'll understand that. The second would be not my eldest brother, but my other brother, who was about 9 years older than me. And he and I went into partnership selling advertising. I was a school teacher for 3 years. I spent 3 years down at Port Adelaide trying to help the students of grade 5 crawl their way up the lower slopes of the knowledge curve, and I came to the conclusion that I'd failed very badly at that. So I went into commission selling on advertising, and then we went into selling coolers, my brother and myself. In October 1969, my brother Cedric went into hospital here in Adelaide to have a